everybody. Welcome to the Front Yard and welcome to our chit-chat. Daly and I have been talking the last couple of weeks on our blogs about the word gather. And so, Daly, what do you think over the last 2-ish weeks as we've been talking about that? Like, what comes to your mind?
I think what comes to my mind is how the different roles that gathering with people who understand me and who love me and who want to see me grow and want to be a support for me, how over my life, how that has changed and how it has changed me. It's been a real interesting reflective thing to think about. How in different seasons you need different things. How do you find those things in seasons that are really hard?
Right.
And even with what does it feel like to have the absence of those things, and how do you cope and deal with that? Like, that's all been within this realm for me. So I could spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah, I think too, especially like coming out of the pandemic, whatever gathering, I think pre-pandemic would have been, our initial thought would have been face-to-face, tangible. I can touch you, you can touch me, we're gathering, we're in a shared space. And I think we realized when we lost that there is a component of gathering that doesn't involve that doesn't have to involve that. Like in an ideal situation, yes, gathering is tangible, face-to-face, breath to breath, but to fulfill that need in our heart, it does not have to be in the same space. You and I feel like our gathering is over Voxer sometimes, 99.9% of the time, not sometimes. But it's the intentionality, the just purpose of coming together with humility, barren hearts, with struggles, that creates that gathering of souls that's different than let's meet at 11 o'clock at your house and have lunch.
Right. And I think it's a great change, because it's also put the emphasis on, if you look at it from what would be, it sometimes feels more like country club get-togethers, you know, whether that's Christian, whether that's with just friends, whether that's just with the people that we meet in our lives. And it's changed it into this, okay, what's really necessary, what is meaningful, what makes an impact in my life. And I think it has morphed, and I think there's been a change in a lot of good ways, which is great. And I think that for me, it does mean that when hopefully we can all start to gather again in these realms, that we are able to step in with a more robust and solid idea of what it means to gather and be with somebody. Putting that component of leaving space and I'm going to stand with you in your stuff, because we can do that without being in physical proximity with one another. And we've had opportunities to be able to do that now. Hopefully that'll bring our coming together and make it even more stronger.
Yeah. And I think it's the, the intentionality of preparing our hearts before we gather. And so even when we have somebody to our home to share dinner, or to last night, all of our neighbors got together and gathered around campfires and had s'mores. And it was, it's kind of magical. It's just kind of like this created space to just be and show up in your yard. But the intentionality of, when I show up, what do I want to portray? Am I portraying having it together, which I've through pandemic and through the last couple years, I've really shed off finally this need to look like I have it together, like that my kids are well behaved and my clothes are what I desire people to see, and my marriage is what I desire people to, like, creating this idea of modeling, right? Like modeling idea. How am I going to intentionally show up with whatever my day actually looked like, instead of it was great, it was fine, what am I willing to share that might create maybe not the best light about a reaction I had to something, but it's truth of who I am. And so I think preparing any situation, whether it's meeting in a front yard or sitting at a dinner table, knowing before you show up what your heart is going to respond to the questions asked, and
Mm-hmm.
how you're going to be present in the conversation happens long before the gathering ever takes place.
I agree. And I think that's such an important part. And a lot of times we're focused more so on how we are being perceived and not so much on whether we are actually showing up.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference in that. Like you either show up as who you are, or you show up in order to mold and make what we want people to see.
Yeah.
And that's two totally different things. And we waste our energy on things that don't matter. I mean, it's like
so much energy. Can we talk about how much energy? And even it's been, I've tried to be more intentional even through social media of like, how do I celebrate the cool things that our family experiences and share life in a genuine way? I mean, social media is not truth the 90% of the time, but how do I create space to still be the whole congruent thing that we've talked about? How do I be congruent there so that I am approachable more so than perceived in a different space? I desire to be approachable, not on a pedestal for what I would desire other people to perceive me as.
Right.
But that's an inner work that starts long before. It takes a lot of inner work to get to that place to recognize how often you're using social media to glorify your life or glorify your accomplishments or portray yourself in a way. It was a lot of years of processing before I was like, oh, I think what I'm meaning to portray and what's being portrayed are not the same. And it makes me unapproachable because of the way I'm portraying myself.
And I think that sometimes there's this expectation, like I think it's our own inner discourse that tells us we want to be perceived at a certain place.
Right.
But I also think it's this expectation from others. And so whether that's like just culture in general,
right.
Whether that's our Christian culture, what tells us that we're supposed to be put together because that makes God look better. But in actuality, that's like, it's counter, that's not, it's through our weaknesses that God is strong. So how do we show up with the whole of who we are, where our limits are, and where we begin, where our end is, both our strengths and our limitations, and neither grandstanding in that, promoting ourselves, even in the ability to show up authentically or congruently, but also not groveling and pretending like we're the worst of the worst. And how do we do this? Like there is this, it is a definite inner work. And I think for me, especially when my husband was in the ministry, there was this, I could feel that pull. And I could feel as he would go into certain, when he would switch jobs, especially, or when we'd go into new arenas, I fought so badly to really differentiate in my head, what is it that is the expectation of others? What is it that is my fleshly expectation or inner dialogue on myself? And then what is it that I truly believe that I am a child of God, just like anybody else? And how do I show up in that? As there are no pedestals. Jason and I have often said, don't put me on a pedestal, because the only place to go from a pedestal is down. Like you fall. That's what you do. So don't ever do that. How do you arrive? And it took a lot of me going, am I spending as much time preparing myself on the inside to a place as I do about putting my makeup on, getting my hair ready, picking out what I'm going to wear. Like there are those kind of things too that can kind of tell us where we are in that journey of trying to figure out, how do we show up completely congruent? How do we do that?
Yeah. It is an inner working. I loved the verse that we blogged on this past week about, it took me a minute to kind of, the verse is from Acts 2, verse 1, and it's when the disciples are all gathered together, and I love that it says in one place, and they receive the Holy Spirit. And I think I read through that verse and then read it in context and then read through it again and thought, this is a verse that I would easily fly past if we had not searched for the word gather, that they had gathered. It is not a time that I would say, let's think of a time when people gathered in the Bible. oh, they all gathered when the Holy Spirit entered. That would not have even crossed my mind as a point of gathering. And I think a lot of times we can overlook in the same way when Christ has gathered us together, that entering with expectation and entering just waiting for him to show up, to do something supernatural, to do something authentic, to do something that leads us into a place of having a deeper understanding and framework of who he is. And so I just loved that whole idea of them modeling for us what it looks like to, they loved each other. It was their friends. It wasn't they It's important to gather with people who are not like you and create space for that, but they were hanging out with their friends at a time when they had lost and grieved, and a time when they had celebrated, and they were showing up with expectation about, like, now what do we do? What do we do? So Jesus is risen. What do we do? And
a lot of unknown, stepping into the unknowns, which
they didn't have
we
a
are.
plan.
Yeah. And we don't, it literally was just, I'm going to show up and you're going to show up. And then we're just going to see what God does here. And I think that part of that of going, he promised he was going to show up somehow, some way. Now, and obviously we already know the story. So we already know the end, but they had no idea. They were literally just showing up, even though it was weird and awkward, made no sense. I mean, like, there was nobody controlling how the next steps were going to happen. It was just everybody showing up.
Right.
And I think even our idea of what it looks like to be in prayer, I think that has changed from what it was then to what it is now. Is it really a prayer meeting? What was it? What did it look like for them to be together, and really trying to figure out how do we show up without putting any expectations on it, except that we show up fully. Right. We allow others to show up fully. And then we literally, with expectancy, see what God does without putting any parameters on it. We just see what God does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one, the gift of the Holy Spirit, even now at work in us, is to recognize those promptings of, like, oh, I think this is the space I'm supposed to lean in because God is here and at work, and he's going to do something with this, even if I don't see it now, even if it's a decade from now or not this side of heaven. I'm just going to show up and be faithful to what he's called me to. And sometimes that work can be really lonely and hard. It was easier for me in Charlotte to do that work when I had people surrounding me and recognizing when I showed up and applauding me showing up, right? That's just human flesh. To do it in a space, to continue to show up when it's the unknown. I don't know how God's going to move. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what he's going to call me into, but I know that he has proven faithful. And that's my framework, is that I've seen him do it before, so I know he'll do it again.
And I think sometimes we're not ever given answers for our faithfulness. Like we won't really understand it until heaven's shore. And I think the obedience and the willingness to step in, how we process sitting with God in his mystery. And that is, it is made to be mysterious. He is mysterious, that he is a mysterious God. He works in ways we don't understand. And how do we say, I'm okay with letting God be God in this space and not trying to control it? And I think that's a huge component of creating the safety for God to move and work, letting the Holy Spirit move within our hearts and move in others' hearts without us trying to control how that happens.
Right.
But it does take a lot of just letting God be God, and us just remembering that we are dust and we show up, and remembering that other person is dust as well, and the person next to her and him over there. Like, it's the whole. It's literally accepting all of the whole, all of our strengths, all of our limits, and then letting God be God in that space. That's awesome. And I think God uses it. I really do. I think he uses it. Was it Dan Allender who said we are relational beings? And so therefore we are healed. God works and heals within relationship. There's something that happens in that mysterious component. So I think it is by design. We've got to figure out, though, how to obey, how to be faithful, and let God do the rest.
Yes. Yeah, and just show up. We're so glad that you chose to gather with us just here in this space. Daly, I'm so thankful that you choose to gather with me off the record when it's just us working out what that means for us. So join us again for a chit chat and we'll gather again.
Bye.
Bye.